T-minus 7 minutes and counting.
January 28, 1986, 11:38 a.m. on a cold winter's day at NASA's Florida base in Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center. 3 hours after its initial launch time, NASA's second space orbiter fired its rockets and lifted into the sky as the entire U.S. nation watched in awe. The Challenger Space Shuttle program began in April 4, 1983. With 9 successful missions over 3 years, the program was intended to transport astronauts and their equipment into space. Competing with NASA's sister program, Columbia, the Challenger quickly became the leading program of the United States Space Association and flew far more missions than Columbia. Even after the space programs of Discovery and Atlantis were created, the Challenger program stayed ahead. The Challenger Space Shuttle, mission STS-51L, the 10th mission of the Challenger program, was intended to deploy the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System. Also known as the TDRS-B, the system would be used by NASA and various other United States government agencies to communicate with independent user platforms, such as satellites, balloons, aircraft, and the International Space Station. Replacing the old existing network of ground stations, once the satellite was in orbit, the range of communication and the amount of data that could be transferred between the ground and user platforms would significantly increase. Mission STS-51L carried 7 people on board. Francis R. Scobie led the team as the commander, Michael J. Smith as the pilot, Ronald McNair, Alison Onuzuka, and Judith Resnick as the mission specialists, and Greg Jarvis and Kristen McAuliffe as the payload specialists. Other than the deployment of the TDRS-B, Kristen McAuliffe was to be the first American civilian to go to space. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, and becoming a school teacher in Concord, New Hampshire, McAuliffe was selected from more than 11,000 applicants. Sent to space as part of Ronald Reagan's Teacher in Space program, McAuliffe was set to conduct various experiments and teach 2 separate lessons from the space shuttle. The intent was to increase public interest in the space shuttle program and encourage financial support.
Lifetime, pretty much, I went into the Air Force at 20 years old, so that's been my significant job.
This is Craig Kennedy. After growing up in Rochester, New York, he joined the Air Force and soon after became a pararescue man.
Right out of pararescue school, I took an assignment down at Patrick, and our job was, we had a small rescue team there, and our job was to rescue astronauts with the contingencies provided by NASA.
In the years before the Challenger disaster, the nation placed high levels of trust in NASA.
You know, up until Challenger, they had had 25 successful launches, not to mention, you know, the Apollo program and the Mercury program. And, you know, they had some minor problems with those. Not minor, but, I mean, they lost some with those. But, you know, up until Challenger, they had never lost seven people at one time. And I think that's what made that the first real significant disaster in NASA's history. But they had had so many victories, you know, with going to the moon and, you know, just, it's big time here, definitely.
Although public opinion cannot be measured with statistics, the overall funding of NASA stayed constant from the mid-1970s to mid-1980s. Investing in a corporation similar to NASA, which relies on funding in order to operate, demonstrates that a large portion of the American public trusted that the association was taking the necessary precautions to ensure the safe return of all astronauts. The Challenger Space Shuttle was set to launch at the Kennedy Space Center on January 22, 1986. However, due to delays in the previous mission and abnormally cold weather, the launch date was postponed until nearly a week later on January 28th.
I remember it was very cold. It was just one of those, in Florida, it doesn't sound cold when you say it's a little bit below 32 degrees, but in Florida there's a lot of moisture in there. So when it's that cold, that moisture just kind of sticks right to you.
We're 1 minute away from picking.
However, even with the freezing temperatures in mind, NASA decided to launch at 11:38 a.m. on January 28, 1986.
T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Merely seconds after launch, black smoke appeared around the O-ring, which secured the solid rocket booster, or the SRB joint. Although a very small component of the overall space shuttle, the O-ring prevented pressurized burning gas from escaping the internal rocket motor. Due to the extreme cold, the O-ring became brittle and shattered. Once broken, and precisely 73 seconds after launch, the burning gas was able to escape the inside motor and reach the external fuel tank, resulting in the explosion of the fuel tank and destroying the shuttle. Just minutes after the disaster, NASA's launch and recovery crew ordered search and rescue ships and aircraft to the location of the impact.
We saw the impact point from about 8 miles out as we were flying out there. Unfortunately, just about the time we saw or got well within distance of the impact point, that's when we noticed that the debris was coming down, and we had to do some tricky flying at that point just to stay in the air.
Due to the amount of debris that was still falling, the rescue mission was delayed an entire hour until the impact zone was safe to begin recovery. Known as Area 37, divers ventured to the ocean floor for over 3 months to recover the crew, salvage equipment, and determine the cause of failure. Although Kennedy's initial role was to clear the launch zone, once debris started falling, his team was immediately sent to help at the impact point.
It's the combination of shock, grief, and adrenaline. And shock, it shouldn't happen. There was 25 launches before that one that went off flawlessly, and that's what we had come to expect from those kind of things. Then grief, because you knew that there was probably 7 people that were dead out there. And then adrenaline, because you knew you were going to have to do your job if one of them was alive.
The disaster left the nation in a state of disbelief, as Senator Bill Nelson, who was part of the Columbia space program in the years after the incident, described in an interview reflecting on the Challenger tragedy.
It was a huge shock to the American people because the space shuttle had come to represent our entire technological prowess. And when people suddenly saw on their television screens that was played over and over the close-up shot of those solid rocket boosters going off in different directions about 10 miles high in the Florida sky, I mean, this was a trauma to the nation's psyche.
When describing the public response, Kennedy compares the aftermath of the Challenger disaster to that of 9/11.
Afterwards, the only thing I could really equate it to was something that you guys might understand is 9/11. When that happened, and you remember the whole pall that cast over the whole country. Well, think of Brevard County, and that was just a microcosm. It just shut this whole place down big time. Just everywhere you went, people had these long stares.
The failure was especially devastating to young students, since their hero, Krista McCullough, was on board.
I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them.
In order to recover and learn, Reagan assigned a commission to investigate the catastrophe. It concluded that the proposed flight rate was unsustainable given the size of the workforce in NASA. In an attempt to recover from the failure, Congress poured money into the space program, increasing NASA's budget by 35%. Investigative findings led to a variety of changes to the program and upgrades to future shuttles, which made the space travel safer. Even so, it was realized that the program could not be sustained and had to be downsized. New procedures were needed, including recovery procedures that were more effective and less costly.
And NASA's always under the gun for budget, and even back then, which was the heyday of NASA. But since then, you know, they shut down the whole program for about 2.5 years, and they came up with a bailout system, what they would do. And it consisted of having the hatch on the side and a bar that telescoped out, and they would just slide out with bailout parachutes. And again, we came up with a different rescue plan at that point to handle that contingency. Well, again, based on the new requirements, when they developed the bailout program, that's when we had to develop a program ourselves to handle that contingency, which was pretty much as they bailed out, you would have had 7 to 8 astronauts out in the ocean about a half mile apart in a straight line. Pararescue guys had to come up with an idea of how to pick them up in the open ocean at that point. So what we did is we came up with a package that consisted of a Zodiac with a submersible engine on it. And we would fold that up, deflate it, and we could load 3 of them on the back of the C-130, rescue C-130. And we were able to push them out under parachute and then jump out after them under freefall parachutes. Follow that into the water, disconnect all the hardware, inflate the boat, get it running. And from there, we drop a package on one end of the line, drop another package on the other end of the line, and both boats would converge in the middle, picking up astronauts along the way.
The Challenger disaster left the legacy of being NASA's first major disaster, showing that the agency was vulnerable to failure. Mistakes such as these have allowed NASA to evolve into what it is today. NASA learned not to be overconfident and overextend as they did before the Challenger disaster, yet was still able to make fundamental advances. Vehicles have been sent to the edges of our solar system. The Hubble telescope has been put into orbit and, more recently, the International Space Station has been built. These scientific and engineering feats have come with many costs, whether big or small, in order to further our knowledge of the universe that surrounds us.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of Earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.